Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Again, welcome. Excited about today's session. Actually, today's session is probably one of the most important ones, one of my most critical component. It's the foundation to the leadership intelligence and behavior intelligence work that we do. So this chapter of the book is very important. But before I get into that, let's make sure we are live, everything is working. Give me a thumbs up in the chat, please, so that I know we are connected and we can see what's going on. If you're there, do tell us where you're from, what country, what city, and we will get started. So I'm just watching the technology. Sorry, I'm just a little bit distracted, but I'm very excited about today's session. So let's get started in a moment. All right, so let me just check one more system. Get input. All right. So what's today about? Our topic today is observation over opinion, the science behind that. And I'm going to talk a lot about that. And I'm going to digress all over the place because, like I said, this is a really big topic and I'm not going to be able to cover it all today. That's why, we are not just launching the book with 196 different strategies. This is part 2, chapter 1 of the book. And there will also be a workshop, training, masterclasses related to this. So if you're interested in diving deeper into all of these sessions that I'm covering, these are really just touching the surface. I'm trying to give you a little bit of a snapshot of what's to come and what you need to think about and consider, etc. So let me dive into this so that we can actually get cracking on that. This is a big topic, but I'm going to try and keep it short. One of the questions I get asked that's related to this is, let's see if I can get my slides working. Okay, leadership blind spots. What you think you see is not actually what's happening. So I'm giving you a scenario on the screen there, right? Team member leaves the meeting early. You get frustrated, you get annoyed, you go, what the hell is going on? Maybe you call them back or you chase them after the meeting. What happened? Why'd you leave? All of these things are human traits that we take what has happened and we apply a judgment, we apply a projection. I'll talk about projections in a moment. We project what might have been going through that person's mind, or we take that information and we process it through our feelings, our emotions. We talked about that last session or a couple of weeks ago. And so all of that is really not facts, right? It's triggered observation. And I was talking to someone just yesterday about AI, and one of the things that's happening with AI is the fact that it's actually concerning us, that it's becoming maybe too much human-like. Okay, and imagine, human beings, we've got qualities that are great and we've got qualities that are really problematic. And when we create a system that's exactly like us or trying to mimic us, are we forgetting about the fact that human beings fight, conflict, there are wars, all of these things? And it's no surprise that we see a lot of tests being done with AI that when you corner it, when you push it into a no-win situation, it retaliates just like us. Okay, and so let's be careful. I'm not sure if we're going down the right path with that. I'd rather have, and I'm spending a lot of hours with AI, writing material, coding, code reviews, all of these things, and I'm seeing this from many different angles. So this is a humanity, okay? When I see AI jumping to conclusions, making assumptions, guessing, these are human traits, right? When you give it information, there's sometimes so much information that it wants to give you a quick answer, it wants to be helpful just like us. And that's what's happening, is it then jumps to conclusions, and those conclusions may not be the right ones. And so a lot of people take those first responses and they don't challenge. When you're working with human beings and they tell you something that you don't agree with, what do? You challenge it. But what we're seeing people doing with AI is they just take the first thing as gospel. They don't challenge it, they don't question it, they don't make it go back over and over again until you have the true facts, right? And really today's session is about the same thing, but from a leadership perspective, okay? So when leaders, can't see clearly, that's just a different way of looking at what you're seeing may not be the reality, okay? 67% of performance issues stem from misunderstood behaviors, all right? And misunderstood behaviors are often because people aren't being asked questions, or they're not asking questions, they're not getting a full interpretation. Misunderstanding, I've talked about that many times. It's one of those four-letter words that I hear often. People that was just a misunderstanding, like just sweep it under the carpet. I can't talk. So 82% of feedback fails because it's based on projected judgment, not facts, right? So we'll talk about that. Teams, right, show a significant improvement when we do these things. The reason, I talk about behavior intelligence is really this is the very fact of that, right? We can't project what people are thinking. You can't read my mind. You just see me doing things. You see me maybe looking at the screen. You observe me actually standing up and presenting, and I get asked that question. How come you're on screen? Why don't you pre-record this and make a professional video? Why aren't you sitting down and doing this? And my answers always are the same. It's the same reason why we will never be able to replace the face-to-face interview when you are recruiting, all right? And the reason being, all the data in the world is not going to really give you the same insights that you will get by having somebody in front of you. The answers you will get from someone in a spontaneous face-to-face interview are going to be different from the answers you get for the same questions if they were given a computer screen and asked to type their answers. They're going to type them, they're going to read them, they're going to correct them, they're calmer, they're thinking more clearly, and that's not the real situation of your workplace, okay? And the same here. The reason I do this live and not pre-recorded is I'm putting myself in a position where you get to see exactly how I am presenting this, the information that's going through my head, the distractions that are going on. If I was just to follow a script, you'd miss out on a lot of stuff that's actually ad-libbed, last minute thoughts. Exactly what's happening, in fact, right this moment. As I was getting ready for this session, I was thinking about all of these things that are really critical about observable behavior. So when we get into what happens, and this is exactly what I was talking about with AI. If you want to talk about AI, we can do that. AI is doing these same things. Your brain is getting so much information, it can't deal with all that information. So humanity has to delete, distort, and generalize. Those are the three key elements that came out of neuroscience and NLP, and they are so important for you to remember, because when we're dealing with AI that can actually do things very quickly, much more quickly than we can, it can process a lot more information than we can. And we put it in a stress situation where we want it to respond quickly. It has to delete, it has to make assumptions, it has to generalize about things. And so you may not get the real facts unless you get it to do a deep search, and you get it to do it again and again and a third time, analyzing what it analyzed. And that's what we do well as human beings when we are put in this situation. We can analyze a situation. That's a first level of thinking, and we can analyze what we analyzed about that situation. We can analyze that, and we can analyze the dynamics, and we can go many levels, but not if you are put in a on the spot situation. And so that's the importance of the different styles of information. That's why Acumatch is important. That's why, face-to-face understanding, observing behaviors, all of these things are important to get people to open up and expose things that they hadn't thought about. That's what coaching is about, getting people to think about what they're doing and getting them to think about what they're thinking about what they're doing, right? And forcing people to a whole new level of thinking and acting, okay? Because no one can read your mind. I've said this a million times. They only respond to how they observe you acting, okay? Your observation is critical. So, I'm going to go through 5 principles that are important to explain this, right? Observation is not opinion. It should not be an opinion, right? So when you observe something, right, you need to verify it with the facts. So you observe somebody, as I mentioned earlier, leaving a meeting early. Rather than jumping to conclusion, maybe you need to find out what happened. What's the reason? Maybe, they've had 10 parking tickets in the past, staying late in meetings, and this was the straw that broke the camel's back, that they wanted to make sure that didn't happen. Or maybe there's a personal situation, whatever, right? So when we observe and judge, right? Another example there, Sarah's disengaged at a meeting. Why aren't you asking questions? Why aren't you involved? Well, maybe Sarah needs time to process, right? So separate the what is happening from why it's happening, okay? You are projecting if you are doing the why based on what you observe. That's your opinion, your judgment based on your past conditioning, not theirs, okay? You are conditioned that when you see this, you jump to these conclusions, you project, and you may be wrong. You could be right, but unless you validate it with facts. You are just really, I call it being human, and we need to be careful with that, right? So what percentage of what you are seeing is facts versus story? Now, in the training, we go deeper into that. We go through some examples and some scenarios so that you can actually practice that. Principle 2, okay? If you can describe what happened, you can start to understand how you process that information, what you thought about that information, right? You can make different decisions, you can explore different ideas, but if you don't pause to do that, right, you can't change the behavior, the action, okay, of what you could do differently. So the point here is observation and confirming the facts is one part, but now you need to go into step 2, which is really, okay, what do I feel about that? What's causing me to react this way about Sarah leaving the meeting early? Okay, what are my rules? What can I do differently? How can I handle this situation differently? And that's really what we're talking about into getting into that second level. Right? Observation is a learned skill. You need to practice it, okay? It's just like a musician, a doctor, anybody doing something that they need to perfect. They need to do it 1,000 times, 10,000 times, right? Okay. You got to do your 10,000 hours or whatever number of repetitions. If you don't do it enough times, you'll never be a good observer, all right? And observation, if it just leads to what you've always done, a quick judgment, projected intention, this person is obviously trying to manipulate the room and taking control and all of these false judgments. Maybe they just have really good intention, but they are doing it the wrong way. So the observation is not the fact of what's going on. So you need to, watch situations, watch groups, dynamic, and it's tough. I have a phrase that we use often: when you're in it, you can't see it. So when you're actually engaged in the conversation and the dynamics and you're responding and participating, unless you take a deep breath and take yourself out of body almost to observe the dynamics of you with these people, you are not really, you're just in it, okay? And you don't get clarity when you're in it, you can't see it, right? That's the phrase. So you need to practice that, taking an instant moment. It doesn't take much to do it, but you have to find a way of interrupting your engagement to step out and just see what's going on. Okay, how is this working? What am I observing, and how is that triggering me? How is it triggering other people? And it becomes the tool of great leadership, okay? So leaders that are leaping to conclusions under stress, all of these things, trying to act quickly, etc., with that, the facts are making mistakes, right? And that's why the stats that I shared earlier are so high. It's staggering, the volume of negative impact that we can have in organizations when we don't take time to understand our observations. Okay. And it goes beyond active listening. I love that word, that phrase, active listening. we've been throwing it around so much that, really it's just a regurgitated version of, something we used to do in the 70s and 80s, and that is repeat back what you heard. Okay. But that's just language, and it's not repeating the observation. It's just listening and repeating back. What you need to be doing is going into the observation itself. So you said this and this and this, but I get the sense by your body language that there's something not quite right here. Can you explain that to me? Or I think this will affect our dynamics this way. How could we alter that scenario so that our dynamics can be improved? So having those kinds of conversation, right, and observing, who speaks when, how often, who loves to talk a lot, who's the quiet listeners. Are the quiet listeners, are they actually just distracted and not involved in the meeting, or are they taking in a lot of information and processing that information, but they are more of a perfectionist? They're not comfortable to blurt out whatever's on their mind until they feel comfortable that it's been tested, they've thought about it, all of these things. So you need to look at all that dynamics and don't just jump to conclusions about what's going on. Ask them, okay, hey, you've been quiet. What's going on? Tell me, right? Share. Is this a safe environment for people to share information with you, or is it not? Okay. So those things are critical. Your brain takes shortcuts, especially under pressure, stress, or multitasking, cognitive overload. We often call it depression, or depressed is the right term. I'm so stressed out. I can't deal with anymore. So I need to reduce the amount of information, reduce the workload. What are the shortcuts that you are taking when you're doing that? We all do it, right? And so I find myself, and I mentioned I do a lot of analytics, a lot of data collection. I'm constantly dealing with facts. So when I see people jumping to conclusions, I have to stop them. When I see AI jumping to conclusions, I stop it and ask it to check again and look here and look there and have you checked this, right? And it's the same with people, okay? When we jump to conclusions and we project intended behavior or intention behind the behavior that we observe, is when we get into conflicts. We get into false generalization about people, about situations, about what they're doing, about the dynamics. So we unpack that, and we use AccuMatch to help people to go through a self-awareness by unpacking that information. So pause, okay? Take a deep breath. We did the breathing exercise a while back, so you can do that. It's very simple. Note the observation, maybe make some notes on the side, and then you can talk to people afterwards, or, ask, what else am I missing? Because you're being triggered, you're responding. Learn to be humble, learn to be open to that. Okay. Your invisible lens, this is an interesting one. We don't realize we're doing that, is your past conditioning. So your professional background, your cultural norms. I was having that conversation just a couple of weeks ago. Does AccuMatch work in our culture? Well, yes. It's in many different languages and many different cultures. And the reason being is it doesn't bring any judgments into play. It gives an opportunity to expose thinking, expose behavior styles, and open that up. Past experiences, emotional states, all of these things, they skew what you are seeing, what you're observing, and they put you in a situation of judgment. All right? The examples there, finance leader, walks into the room, somebody's sharing some ideas. The first thing that goes through their mind is all the risks and financial impact and all of that, right? So when they respond about all the things that could go wrong, we quickly judge their negative intention as, why are you kiboshing this idea? Give it a chance. You got to understand their behavior and where it's coming from. You need to ask them, okay, explain that to me. Okay, right? Marketers, they see opportunity. They don't see the pitfalls. I was having this conversation a few weeks back as well. The marketing team or the sales team, they see these huge opportunities, and they're so focused on getting the opportunity, they never even considered the company's ability to deliver on that promise. Okay, so they're making all kinds of assumptions and generalizations. They just want to win that sale so much and throw it over the fence, right? Okay, so we need to be careful, get the complete picture. Mm-hmm. So, filtering your assessment. Here's a quick exercise you can do, okay? As a leader in your organization, a manager of people, right? What do you focus on? What's your lens? Is your lens about the, I had one business owner, his lens was about building a team and having camaraderie and everybody having fun. And guess what? The business wasn't doing well, and he had to upset all of those people when he had to let a few of them go, because so focused on the dynamics, him having fun rather than the business numbers. Or the opposite, the person that is just so focused on the numbers and the KPIs and forgetting that there's human beings that need to do this work, right? So what's your lens? And is it an engineering background, financial background, a sales background? What's skewing your observation? How do you interpret what you observe? How do you check it? What's your automatic unconscious checklist that your brain goes through when it observes a situation and draws conclusions from that? How do you unpack that? AccuMatch allows us to do that. Behavioral intelligence is the whole process of learning how to do that. Okay. List two alternatives. So in that specific situation, you don't need to boil the ocean, as they say. You just need to pick one thing and ask yourself, in that situation, what could I have done differently? Just pick two things and then think about, okay, what could have happened in that situation? What could I have improved? How could I have gotten the facts, right? Okay, so get a more holistic understanding. Maybe ask other people, hey, I observed, Sarah disengaged in the meeting. Do you know what's going on there? Yeah. Maybe next time you talk to her, I'll talk to her, and let's see what's going on. So get a more holistic view before you jump to conclusions. And AccuMatch has exposed situations where someone in that similar situation was really just disinterested. They were already looking for another job or another career, and so there was a bit of reality to that, but leaping to that conclusion without following the facts and exposing that is wrong, right? The observation habit loop, we call it, it's automatic unconscious. You've been conditioned through thousands of repetitions to act the way you do. You weren't born that way. You've learned it so you can learn something new. All right. And this is what you might want to do, is the 4 steps to improving that. First, you need to notice it, okay, and be a scientist, an analyst about it, and record what you observed, reflect on it, okay, before you try something different, okay. So in this situation, this particular person triggers me, goes back to my childhood days when I was being bullied, and I always approach situations from a defensive point of view rather than an open receiving perspective. What was your conditioning? That's one example, right? Some people had a different experience. They've always had things handed to them. What's their past conditioning? Or, having worked in a corporate environment on military grade projects, my lens of software development is it has to work 100% of the time, 0 defects. So those are your lenses. What do they mean to you? Record your situation. What do you want to do differently, etc. Real world applications, so case study, right? Team seeming resistance to new processes, the leader pushes, the resistance increases, it's just counterproductive, it's just not going to work, right? We need to understand why so much pressure. Is it the time stress, financial stress, emotional stress? What is it, okay? I've listed 3 stresses that are really important there. So the observation, maybe 3 out of 5 team members, they start to ask questions, 2 are silent, right? That's the observation training. What could we have done differently to help them engage, okay, so when you start to engage and listen and watch the observations, you can improve the culture, the dynamics, the motivation. And when those things are addressed, people do better job. They get better results. That last slide, 73% faster adoption. All right, I'm going to share with you your LISA assessment again today. So you hang on, I'll share that link later on, and access to some of the books online. But here is your observation toolkit. Basically, observation versus opinion, separate the two. Okay, what you observe is your brain turns into an opinion, that's humanity, and you need to back it up by facts, right? So what are the patterns that you are seeing? What filters are you using as an audit checklist in your brain that's happening automatically, right? 3-column feedback framework. I can talk about that another time, but basically you can work through that. And the daily observation card, all right? So this is the toolkit that during the training, we go through that and people get access to that. For coaches, because this isn't just for leaders, this is also for coaches, multiplying your impact, okay? When your model is based around observation, you build more trust. You're exposing facts, right? Instead of your personal judgments being puked out without you realizing, you are diffusing the situation by asking people to explain what you observe. Okay. And that allows them to reach a heightened self-awareness. You actually transform the relationship, and you transform an organization and leadership through better observation. And we train people and coaches and leaders in this through AccuMatch, because AccuMatch gives us a 49 different behavior traits that we start to learn to observe. Some of the coaches have been doing this for almost a decade with me. They can listen for the language, they can observe different behaviors, and it's all language that they have learned through the behavior traits that we talk about in AccuMatch. Mm-hmm. Common pitfalls. All right, so let's just repeat that one more time. I think I've touched on all of these, but just a bit of reflection. Right, it's what before why. Right, so understand the what, or not rushing to the why automatically. Don't do the three things that we are automatically conditioned to do. Generalize, distort, and delete. Okay, we delete lots of information because we can't absorb it all, and so we generalize and we distort what we are observing. Right, so these are three key elements. Mm-hmm. Using trait labels instead of behavior labels, and again, this is the AccuMatch and behavior intelligence methodology. We don't use labels. We look at specific behaviors, right? So, for example, this person prefers to be compliant in situations. They don't like disagreement. That's the behavior. They will not sit and disagree. They need to go away and process it before they come back and ask questions, right? So you need to understand that. Another person might be a creative problem solver and doesn't like getting stuck into a long, detailed discussion in a meeting that is not relevant to them. All of these are the behaviors that we sometimes mislabel them, right? Mm-hmm. Don't make the mistake of believing your perceptions. We anticipate, we perceive intention, all of these things, and we treat them as if they are truth. Okay, people get called liars because of the observed language rather than understanding the intention. That's how conflict occurs, right? Okay, so be careful with your perception is not truth. Ignoring your emotional state. If you've had a bad day or haven't slept well and you're under pressure and you don't want to take the time to really understand something, you could get yourself into trouble. Your emotional state, your home state, right? As a leader, we often don't want to go down those paths because, it's not my responsibility, that's their responsibility. That I've heard that so many times. Verify the observations. Okay. So here's your 7-day challenge. I'm looking at the clock and just want to wrap it up here. Basically, just pick one thing. You don't have to pick a different thing every day. You can just pick one thing that you want to improve. You want to become a better observer. I had to learn this very young. We were often going into meetings, and as a young guy, I was so excited about what's going on. I'd come out and my mentor, my boss back then, he would say, "Did you observe this? Did you observe that?" I go, "Oh, no, I missed all of that." So I then deliberately started to reprogram my brain into being an observer in those meetings. And that was so powerful. In sales, it's important. In a lot of areas, that's very important. Right, identify your filters. How are you filtering that? What's your past conditioning? Is it you're filtering through your lens of your role or your lens of your career aspirations? What is it? Okay. And do a feedback session. Ask people. I'm observing this. Right? Share your results on leadership intelligence online. Please give us your thoughts. All right, so wrapping up, key takeaways: observation versus opinion. Describing things is important. Describe the observation, understand your thinking pattern. You can reprogram your brain, as I mentioned. You just need to start doing this stuff, right? Catch yourself, get people to help you do that, and practice, right? I don't know how many times I say that during all our trainings. Obviously, I think it's important. All right, so some of the questions you may consider, and we'll watch for those in the chat. Okay. Can you give feedback without interpretation? Right? What if my observation differs from other people's observations? And it will, right? How long until it becomes natural? It depends how often you practice it. Okay, if you only practice it once a week, it's going to take months, years. If you practice it 10 times a day, it will be much quicker, right? So you need to take deliberate action to do that, okay? And allow yourself to be human. You are going to forget to do it sometimes. It's not the end of the world. You just pick yourself up and get back on that treadmill, right? Next week, right, I'm going to dive into cracking the code, how patterns predict performance. So we are all about understanding how people act in certain situations so that we can predict that. And usually we naturally do it by observing people having done that before, and we jump to the conclusion that that's what they'll do every single time. And so we don't promote people. We get into all kinds of performance-related situations that are really not very helpful and don't allow people to grow within your organization. So we'll talk about that next week. Again, biqorg.com/events. If you want to catch some of the previous sessions, they're all on there. Okay. Not all, well, the ones that we've done this year are there. We're bringing back some of the old ones. I think I want to talk about AI in a blog shortly, so do watch for that. And do your assessment. Okay, so how good are you at self-awareness? LISA assessment is a leadership self-awareness assessment. That's what LISA stands for. So get on there, try it out, and I hope to see you next session. We'll be away for a couple of weeks. It's holiday time, vacation time. So see you when we return. All right. Take care. See you next time.